if the municipality was having was not responding, you could put it on the board to reach out to them and get a direct response if the applicant was having a hard time. But I think what the original request was to have the applicant get a response.
I'm with you.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. I didn't understand that.
Okay, but the question, Carrie, go ahead.
We did talk about making sure if we're asking for educational services, it goes to not necessarily the municipality, unless you define a municipality as the education district, the school district. It's separate from a municipality, it's a different, and similarly with 7, that seems to make sense. And we also heard that from Mr. Warren in response to Vermont leaders in towns, Mr. Coleman, that we would change that we could change the 90 days to 120 days.
Well, let's talk about that as a group.
Can I ask Greg quickly? Do they currently ask the school district? Do you know?
I think it probably goes to the school district. I'll have to check on that though to make certain.
Okay. Yeah, because I wanted to read.
And just not to forget, school districts are municipalities under
Right.
Vermont law, so that way you can address both by saying
That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
Yep.
Okay.
But we also talked about the presumption that they won't have an unreasonable burden if they haven't heard back. We talked about a different kind of standard of having having that not just default. As the committee, remember that? Yes, we took testimony on it that it still could have an effect on a school just because they didn't hear back doesn't mean that it didn't. I don't remember the suggested solution.
Well, I do know from testimony from the Vermont League of Citizen Towns, they said just due to the infrequency of some of the select boards and governing boards meeting schedules, that 90 days might place a burden on the municipality in being able to respond within that time frame.
Right, that's what we're
Yeah.
talking about. And right now it's presumed. What's that?
I don't remember, I don't think a solution was offered.
She did mention 120 days.
No, just generally to the whole
To the presumption.
thing, the whole presumption.
Isn't it in the law that silence is recognized as a sign of consent?
I mean, under the rules of evidence, silence isn't an admission. Is that?
It's golden.
You don't speak up, you're lost.
Can you think of a way to help them with the concern that they have?
I mean, I think this is a specific proposal. I'm not sure I can think of another sort of, carrot versus a stick on this. If a developer is concerned that a municipality is taking a long time to respond, this is a way to get them to respond. And presumptions can be overcome. So I don't know. I haven't thought about alternatives.
What do you mean by presumptions can be overcome? Sorry.
So it's presumed that it won't have an unreasonable burden, but if someone wanted to challenge that, they could introduce evidence to the contrary.
And under the new system, they would do that where if they missed the deadline.
Well, the application would be heard either by the board or the district commission.
And then that's it. After that, goes to the Supreme Court.
Jim and then Warren.
I'm thinking, I've got, the question is 90 days, or should it be something else? Is that really where we are?
That's one of the questions.
Okay, well, that's the one I'll speak to then. Of course, the municipality would want 120 days, maybe 365 days. I'd like to know within 3 months.
Yeah.
if I'm a developer, what's happening? And I want to, you know, and 90 days was just picked, but we got to pick something. And I think we need to say, I propose the 90-day language is good, and then we go to that other thing we're talking about, whatever that was.
Well, I think actually, I'm gonna make a suggestion that we leave this and move on and try to get through the criteria before we adjourn.
Yeah.
Because we're at 7, we're really at 8, if we can accept this language right now. I don't wanna pressure anyone, but can we move on to 8 and Karen?
Oh, can we offer them a chance within that 90-day window to ask for an additional 30 days? And that way, if you have, if it's a burden on our smaller municipalities, you have a way for them to extend their time.
Seems reasonable to me right now. Yeah. Okay, I think by lack of response to any of my recent questions, I'm gonna just say maybe we're done. I was hoping to get to 10, but I'm not getting a reading from folks.
Well, maybe that was the question I didn't understand. The other question that I didn't understand when we're dealing with 90 days.
If I don't get a response within 90 days, 90 seconds.
Silence doesn't necessarily mean.
I think the end of the criteria is a good stopping point, and I think it's a good goal.
Then let's keep going.
I
State
think we
government
keep going.
closed at noon. I just want to say that.
What?
State government, I think, closed at noon.
Yes.
State government's still quite present in the room, and they're helping, and I'd love to just
All right.
get through the criteria.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, state government.
They may shut your lights off in here. Wi-Fi may go down permanently.
You don't have to go home, but you can't stay here.
The legislative branch is separate.
That's right. Let's go. Let's
Ah.
all right. Okay, 8.
Thank
Ecosystem protections.
Ecosystem protection, scenic beauty, historic sites.
Has
So
this changed at all from our last review of it?
nope. I did not change it. 8B is forest blocks. That's on page 54. I also didn't change. Oh, I don't think I think I might have changed one word.
So this one is a big one because we've
Right.
taken testimony from from a few people on it. Carol has something to say.
I would like to put mitigation back in.
Yes, I think that's a good suggestion. But the higher level decision is that there's been a recommendation to consider having this criteria, but have it be under rulemaking. Am I right on this one?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So I think that's the crux of the discussion here.
Why do they need that again? I forget.
Matt?
Sure. So there are two reasons. One is that the methodology that's proposed here is not consistent with the way the Fish and Wildlife Department approaches these two issues, and the other is that because of the sort of complexity associated with it, they think and the ecologists think that it would be better suited to have a more robust dialogue around both how the criteria work and how the mitigation sequencing works as a board rule as opposed to having it embedded in statute.
And what motivates? Warren, go ahead.
The other thing I think you probably heard from Jeff Nelson and you heard from me yesterday was another reason to make sure you do this through rulemaking. I think what we would propose is to specify at least some issues that to make sure that our are addressed during rulemaking. A lot of them actually come from things that you've had in your bill from the last biennium. You know, what are some of the tools or ways that somebody avoids or minimizes their impact and how they design something? That's a discussion we need to have. The other piece that was in your bill, which I think is really important, and I talked to you about yesterday, is how does an applicant or a neighbor or somebody know where the forest blocks are, where the connecting habitat is? So first they gotta have the tools to know, am I in or am I out? And then if I'm in, then the other piece about how do I know what I should do to try and avoid, minimize, or if you get to the mitigation, what that looks like. So I started drafting a list based on your bill from the prior biennium and some of this that I just haven't had a chance to sit with others to say, is this cover the topics that we should cover to have a robust rulemaking process, and then present that to you. But that's the idea. So I think you could start with.
Well, I think we have that in our draft. We have H33 kind of already in here. So you're proposing that we would use that as language to guide the rulemaking.
What I would propose is you actually use the joint proposal language, which is really just adds in the definitions. I think we talked about yesterday adding the definition of fragmentation back in, which is in your draft, but it wasn't in the joint proposal draft. But then in the rulemaking section of the latter part of the bill, being specific in what needs to be addressed during the rulemaking process.
Yeah, I think that's kind of what I just said.
Okay.
Might be those things. Yeah. Okay. Okay. But this committee needs to decide if they've been compelled and convinced that this requires rulemaking. I have a question for legislative counsel while you all contemplate that larger question, which is what happens if an agency doesn't do rulemaking when we ask them to?
I mean, nothing. If an agency misses a deadline, you can call the agency in and ask why. It will, impact the permitting process, because there will be some, perhaps confusion, but there isn't necessarily a specific hook or penalty that you can apply, unless if you're concerned that an agency is going to miss a deadline in rulemaking, you can build in an effective date section where, unless the agency adopts rules by a certain point, language will take effect if the agency misses the deadline for adopting rules.
That's a good suggestion. Yeah.
Okay.
We've done that.
Warren?
Actually, what I think your bill from 233, the motivation for everyone to get it done was the regulated community needs the certainty about what they're supposed to do under the new criteria, and the motivation for the agency is that you've heard from them. This is a very important new criteria they want to add. I think what we had been talking about was that until the rules are actually adopted and everyone knows what the rules of the road are, so to speak, the criteria isn't in play. So there's motivation for everyone to get it done in order for this to actually take effect. Otherwise, you're going to have a criteria that no one knows how they're supposed to comply with. So you actually had a date sequence in your prior bill that I was looking at last night that I think does that. It basically creates that sort of staggered sequence to make sure, with deadlines, to make sure it gets done.
Carol?
So I don't see any reason not to do the effective date of this section takes effect unless the rules are adopted by.
Yep. Jamey? Jamey, did you want to add something?
Jamey Fidel with VNRC. Just a friendly reminder that in H233, you actually had in there that there should be guidance developed, that the agency would develop the guidance so that it was clear how to meet the criteria. And there was also supposed to be, I believe, a rulemaking or a process on the mitigation, and so I think there was the intent in 233 that that kind of work would be needed. So if you do take the route of doing a rulemaking, I think that would be sort of consistent, even though you had very specific language in 233 about some of the mechanisms to get, that would go into, I think, the guidance. I think you could craft that language, that guiding language, address these through the rulemaking, and that's fairly consistent with, I think, the approach we were trying to take in 233, that there was recognition there was additional work needed so that applicants would know how to meet the intent of it.
Jim?
So this is for Jamey, and I think it's gonna even speak to what Warren said. We lift that language and put it in here instead of try to create some new language that's sort of like that. Does that?
It's, I would say, when I was reading, this is Warren, when I was reading it last night, some of H233 is probably maybe overly prescriptive. It was
Not the
based
whole
on-
bill, just the.
There's enough to say, you know, where it had very specific language about locating next to roads or
Yeah, yeah,
fences or
yeah.
utilities. I think we can take the concept of, without importing that level of detail.
No,
and
totally.
outline it in the rules.
Totally. What I intended to ask was take the rulemaking authority
Yes.
and the prescription about time, lift that and put it in here.
Yeah, I think you could use that format.
Yeah. And Jamey?
To take the specifics, you mean that are in, that were in there as far as mechanisms,
For
and use that
rulemaking
as a
and-
guidance for your rulemaking.
Yes.
Yes.
And just lift that out of there and put it in here, and Ellen won't have to.
These are the concepts that
Yeah.
you would like to see addressed in the rulemaking.
Yeah. And we'll see what
Site
that looks like.
design,
Yeah. Got it. Yeah.
get at those concepts.
Yeah.
You're saying the same thing.
Does that make sense, Ellen, as the direction to go?
Design a rulemaking directive that would take the language from A, B, and C.
I think that's what I,
Okay.
yeah.
So Madam Chair, when 233 was passed in committee, we spent a lot of time on it in terms of trying to come up with definitions. It just seemed to be a very elusive, people would kind of stumped as to how you defined it. And I'm thinking my colleague, Little Hamlet, suggesting that we make sure that those considerations that we put into that bill follow or are enclosed in this one as well. I mean, I think rulemaking's a good idea. I agree with it. I like the deadline. I'd like to put a deadline on it as well. But I think since we were very comprehensive when we were looking at that bill, and I'd hate to have that lost when it goes to rulemaking, so they see what those considerations were. I mean, we've just kind of now coming up with what going to rules. I mean,
I think you just summarized the conversation pretty well.
Yeah.
I think that's where we're at.
Yeah. I think so.
okay.
And we'll see what it looks like.
So good wait. What's the next one?
9.
9F. Oh, well, actually, 9. So on page 56, 9, we discussed yesterday unstriking the language on line 11 through 13, referencing the capability and development plan. So it's currently struck, but I think the directive yesterday was that we were going to unstrike it.
Yep.
Next is 9F, energy conservation and efficiency. The change from the last draft is that I took out the last sentence, which required the board to adopt rules for this section.
Is that here?
I took it out. So you in the previous draft, it said the last sentence after the stretch code said the board shall adopt rules establishing the procedure for certification or establishing the procedure for something. Establishing the procedure for inspection. So, you asked me to strike that sentence.
I don't remember that at all for some reason. Maybe I wasn't in the room. Jim?
Yeah,
I'm not questioning you.
Yeah.
I just don't remember it.
Yeah.
I fully own that I don't remember it.
the thermal efficiency unofficial committee of the Climate Caucus met 6 times last summer, and that equals a whole bunch of hours and dozens of people, from architects to builders to the AGC and Home Builders of Vermont, and just keep pulling them out of your sleeve, Jim. All agreed that the level playing field had to be made, and that could only, for contractors, builders, and that could only be accomplished through making sure people did what they were supposed to do. And because we have these codes and we have no enforcement and we have no ability to even like do testing to see. So I think, I'm pretty sure we ought to have rules about how we determine if this is done. And in fact, pre-tests were strongly recommended, where at the end of phase 1 of the construction, we're thinking of a building, for instance, the inspector goes in and sees that the construction is done in an airtight manner. You don't want to have a blower test after 10 days before closing and find out it leaks like a sieve. So you can, because nobody wins. So they wanted inspections, and they wanted the ability to enforce, to keep it a level playing field. So all of this is to say is, I'm not so sure we should have pulled out established rules.
I think now you're reminding me, I think we did that because we decided it wasn't necessarily the NRB, but the Public Service Department. Did I say that right?
Correct.
Yeah, so that because it would really be, they're the ones who are forced, no one's enforcing, but they're in charge of updating the code now. And, I mean, I suppose we could put that in here.
Well, for Act 250 projects, we could, but we wouldn't govern the rest of the state, so maybe.
I think part of the conversation also was that the NRB already has sort of they use a procedure to demonstrate how you comply with this criteria. So I don't know if requiring that they adopt further rules was necessary, because they have to figure out how someone is going to comply with this criteria anyway. But maybe I'm misstating that.
Moving on.
I just wanted to mention that the codes, the energy building codes, the infrastructure codes were just updated in September, both require blower tests. And so keeping in Mississippi.
We've taken testimony that those are 10 years behind and we should be going to net zero.
That's why the stretch code is critical to include, because of.
Even the stretch code is behind. So I wonder for this committee, we will adjourn, but just that, how to get to that. All right.
So we
Cascade
keep it
costs.
struck?
I think keep it structured,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yep, good.
And be vigilant for where else we can put it in, or get another committee to do it in their bills.
Run it by.
Greg?
If I could just ask a quick question. So in the draft that I have before me, there's a discussion of certification and established through inspection. That's the underline on page 57. So I think, as Ellen was suggesting, we do have a certification process in place by way of our procedure. I'm not exactly sure what the inspection means and who would be required to make sure the inspections happen. So is that something that the committee isn't envisioning the NRB doing on our own?
Actually, I guess I thought that's what we decided to take out.
Oh, I thought you were talking.
Oh, I
I'm sorry, I thought you were talking about striking requirement to establish rules, which was already stricken.
Yeah, I want to keep this.
Okay, I guess I thought we had decided that since this was a statewide problem that every builder needs to address, not just developments under Act 250, that we should, as a legislature, figure out the best place to make this requirement, but that it is not necessarily at the NRB, because they only review 20% of development.
I think that's what I understood.
Go ahead, Carrie.
I know there's a bill to make this statewide and with the new stretch codes, but I prefer to keep it in here because it is still 20%, and it's an important standard that we're trying to achieve statewide. I think through the NRB's rules or procedure, they can determine that certification is in terms of meeting that criteria.
We did hear that there are already existing certification systems stood up and used today, so okay.
That's right. So I
All
guess
right.
can I ask?
Yes.
So would it be possible then, Peter Walke, A&R for the record, would it be possible then to strike an inspection piece, right? So you can have the certification, the inspection, asking the NRB to inspect is not the appropriate location, but to have a valid certification process.
I hear you, in the valid, but I think the valid certification process, we've been told includes inspection.
Unless,
I hear you that you don't, the NRB is not gonna go walking around doing inspections.
Right, but if it's a third-party certification process, it seems to imply that you want an active state inspection process, and that may not necessarily be the case. The work may be covered through that certification process, and therefore capture that. So we're looking at the effectiveness of the certification process and whether it includes third-party inspection rather than going out and doing the inspection itself.
So we just need to clarify that. I think inspection is important, and it's gonna be part of the certification process. Is that not what you're trying to say?
I think he wants to make sure that it's not the NRB doing the inspection, that it's the consultant or certifier who's doing the inspection.
What I'm trying to be clear on is that the NRB should establish what certification process meets their standards. And that certification process, as we understand it, includes inspection, but that it's the certification that you are asking the NRB to do.
Yeah.
Would this language work by an inspection-based certification process?
Mr. Weiss has something to add.
Thomas Weiss. The certification and inspection can't be done until after the project is complete, because you're trying to certify and inspect that it's been done in accordance with the codes. So it seems inappropriate to put that here where the commission has to, there was some discussion yesterday about conditions that you can't put in conditions in the permit that can't be determined until later.
Yeah.
no,
That's a really good point.
that's not entirely accurate, based on testimony
Yeah.
we got this summer. After a certain phase of construction is done, you can do testing. And after the next phase is done, more observation and testing, and then the final test that says, yep, this all worked.
Right, but this is before any construction happens, Jim. This is a permit to begin your project. So you haven't done anything. So I think that might be speaking to the fact that this isn't quite the right tool for this job.
Yeah.
It's a great,
Great idea.
it needs to happen, but it needs to happen in a different place.
And it makes me think that Act 250 will be holding people up and they'll be complaining, and it'll be because of some other system.
Well,
that
I
isn't
just think
working.
it's not achievable.
No,
You can't expect something that's not been built.
right.
You could certify the plan, and that's what's
Yeah.
happening now, and I think that is,
The idea is to have it certified that it will meet whatever the standard is,
Yeah.
and then a certification that it was built that way
after.
afterwards.
So what would that language look like?
Well, that's the way we have it in our procedure already.
So how would we describe it?
Back to what's the problem this is trying to solve?
I mean, I could work with Ellen and come up with something if you'd like.
Okay.
I think it's just.
All right, team. I don't know that we're gonna make our goal here. I'm pretty goal oriented, but we're down to less than a quorum. And it's 12:30 on a snow day.
How many more pages?
Can I, could I just propose it quickly? 9K?
Yeah,
Do
thank
you,
you.
do you wanna add the language from VHCB?
Yes.
Okay.
And is there anything else like that? I think we could try on the housing language as well.
Mixed income
That was
housing?
the downtown, in the downtown exemption, we should, you could draft it. I think they're one word off, I heard, so if we could just leave that word out, we'd be good.
But they said in one place we had to choose two, and,
Anyway,
yeah.
we're gonna want a space in there for that language, do you know what I'm talking about? The
Is it-
Earhart,
Is it the mixed income?
Earhart's
what
language.
was- Okay.
Earhart brought us,
Okay.
well, I don't know if he gave us language or not, but, and Jen Hollar has her hand up.
On Hollar VHCB, if it would be helpful, there are two questions. There's the update to the mixed income housing definitions that Maura Collins from VHFA offered, and then there is the question that Earhart brought to you, the policy question about if you exempt all downtowns and neighborhood development areas from Act 250, then you lose the priority housing project incentive in those places, and the administration and the Affordable Housing Coalition are trying to work out an alternative that would happen in the designation process. So there are two pieces.
And they haven't come back
They're not-
yet.
And I can say, they just emailed me and said that they've got a conceptual agreement, and they've asked me to kind of help work on turning it into something that I can give to Ellen.
Great.
So Monday?
I know.
Are you working on, are
Monday.
you working this afternoon? Yeah, Monday was great.
I'll probably be here.
All right,
Do people live permanently?
yes, people have left permanently, so. Any other things like that we have, that would help Ellen draft more, that we have already consensus on? I don't wanna get into the weeds on any of the things that.
Can we talk about 10 really quickly? Do you want your new board to be approving regional plans?
What page are you on?
Criterion 10 is on page 58. So currently, you are requiring that town plans be approved, but you also are requiring that regional plans be approved by the board.
I think, yeah, for now, that's what we're doing.
Okay.
Although that reminds me that if we take the study language in, that was addressed in the study language in the joint proposal.
Yes.
So we're not ready to decide that, I guess.
Okay.
All right.
The only two criteria we did not talk about are climate adaptation and environmental justice, which are your new 9s. And those are probably bigger conversations.
Yeah. Alrighty. Can folks start early on Tuesday?
Yes.
Yes.
The floor's at 10. 8:30?
8:30.
8:30 on Tuesday, and we need to make sure we email all the members and update the agenda for the show starting at 8:30. Ellen, can you be here at 8:30 on Tuesday?
I was going to be here anyways.
Okay, great. And I know V-Trans would like to present to us,
Thank
so
you.
let's just hear from V-Trans at 8:30 on Tuesday morning.
Oh, thank you.
Sorry that got this up. All right, we're adjourned.